People ask me all the time whether real estate or stocks make more money. I think that is the wrong question. The real question is this: which wealth engine fits the life you are actually willing to live? That is the mother line of this story. Because when most people compare real estate and stocks, they do not compare engines. They compare fantasies. They compare a polished rental property story to a simplified index fund story. They compare the rent check to the brokerage screenshot. They compare the dinner party version of being a landlord to the emotionally empty version of owning an index fund. They compare feelings. They do not compare full math, full stress, full time, full leverage, full tax treatment, full liquidity, and full repeatability. That is why they get the answer wrong before they even begin. The truth is not that real estate always wins. The truth is not that stocks always win. The truth is that each one pays you in a different currency before it pays you in dollars. Real estate pays you in leverage, control, tax shelter, and story. Stocks pay you in liquidity, passivity, scalability, and time freedom. If you do not understand the currency you are being paid in, you will choose the wrong engine for your own life. That is where most people go broke emotionally long before they go broke financially. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine two men starting from the same line. One man takes $50,000 and buys a modest rental house with a mortgage. The other takes the same $50,000 and puts it into a broad stock market index fund. Same starting capital, same income, same city, same age, same desire to become wealthy. The only thing that changes is the engine. Now here is what happens psychologically on day one. The real estate man feels rich. He has a house. He has a tenant. He has a rent check. He has something he can point at with his finger when he drives by. He has a story. The stock investor has a confirmation email and a line in an app. Nobody cares. Nobody asks him questions at dinner. Nobody thinks he is building an empire. Nobody congratulates him on buying an index fund. And that difference in emotional reward is one of the biggest hidden variables in the entire comparison. That is the first mechanism. I call it the story premium. Real estate comes with built-in social proof. People understand houses. They understand doors, roofs, tenants, neighborhoods, paint, and leases. A rental property looks like progress even before it proves it. It lets the owner feel like a businessman immediately. That feeling is not meaningless. It matters because people are human. Human beings like visible symbols of advancement. A deed feels more impressive than an ETF statement. A rent check feels more alive than a quarterly market update. That story premium is why so many people emotionally overweight real estate before they ever run the full numbers. But stories are not returns. Stories are advertising. And one of the best ways to lose money is to buy the story of an asset instead of the full structure of it. Now let us talk about what the real estate engine actually does well, because it does some things extremely well. The first is leverage. Leverage is the strongest and most seductive feature of real estate because it lets an ordinary person control a large asset with a much smaller amount of money. Put $50,000 down on a $250,000 property, and suddenly your capital is controlling something 5 times its size. If the property rises in value, your equity can grow far faster than your original cash contribution would suggest. That is real. That is powerful. And that is why real estate has made a lot of people feel brilliant. But leverage is not free magic. It is borrowed force. And borrowed force only looks genius when the asset behaves. The financing remains stable. The tenant pays, the roof holds, the insurance stays reasonable, the taxes do not jump too hard, and your own life does not become too crowded to manage the thing. That is why I call leverage a magnifier, not a miracle. A magnifier enlarges good outcomes and bad ones. This is where the second mechanism comes in. I call it the invisible friction. A rental property looks wonderful when you compare rent to mortgage and stop there. That is how amateurs do math. They say the rent is $1,800, the mortgage is around $1,300. Therefore, I am making $470 a month. No, you are not. You are beginning the conversation at the wrong line because the mortgage is not the whole machine. Property taxes are not included in that fantasy. Insurance is not included. Vacancy is not included. Turnover is not included. Cleaning is not included. Repairs are not included. Capital expenditures are not included. Your own labor is not included. Property management is not included, which means if you do not hire it, your time is the unpaid line item. Bad tenants are certainly not included. That is why a lot of rental property math looks beautiful on a napkin and ordinary in a ledger. A landlord may collect nearly $65,000 in rent over a few years and still discover that after taxes, insurance, repairs, vacancy, relisting, and irregular emergencies, the actual cash flow kept is far smaller than the story suggested. This does not make real estate bad. It makes landlord math honest. Honesty is what most asset comparisons are missing. People love the number before expenses. I care about the number after everything, and everything must include time. Time is the third mechanism, and it is one of the most abused variables in financial conversations because people refuse to price their own lives properly. If you manage the property yourself, you have not avoided a cost. You have absorbed a cost, the calls, the scheduling, the tenant screening, the repair decisions, the weekend interruptions, the contractor nonsense. The emotional drag of holding a single physical asset that can surprise you at inconvenient hours. All of that is a cost, even if no invoice arrives with your name on it. That is why I call real estate a labor. Linked asset unless systems and management replace your labor effectively. People say, I save money by not using property management. No, you are converting money cost into time cost. That may be rational. It may even be the right choice for you early on, but call it what it is, a part-time operating role attached to the investment. Now let us compare that to the stock market engine, because the stock market has a completely different emotional problem. The stock market is often right, but unimpressive. That is the fourth mechanism. I call it the boredom discount. A man who puts $50,000 into a broad index fund and adds a few $100s a month does not get a story anyone wants to hear. He has no property address, he has no tenant story, he has no barbecue status. For the first few years, the account grows quietly, maybe from 50,000 to 55, then 61, then 76. The growth is real, but emotionally it feels bland. The stock investor looks inactive because his engine works in silence. That silence is why so many people underestimate compounding. Compounding is socially boring before it becomes financially astonishing. The first years are almost designed to test your ability to stay interested in something that is working slowly. Then somewhere in the second decade, the slope changes. The gains on gains begin to matter more than the original contributions. The machine starts carrying more of the load. At that point, the quiet investor suddenly looks smart. But the skill was never stock picking. The skill was endurance without applause. That is much harder than it sounds. Most people do not fail in index funds because index funds are bad. They fail because quiet wealth does not flatter the ego enough to hold attention. Now let us talk about concentration, because this is where the two engines diverge in risk more sharply than the average person admits. The landlord with one modest rental property has one asset in one zip code with one mortgage structure, one local tax regime, one insurance environment, one tenant pipeline, and one physical building that can develop one very expensive personality problem at the wrong time. That is concentration. People call it tangible. I call it concentrated. The stock investor in a broad total market fund owns thousands of companies across many sectors, management teams, geographies, and business models. That is not just diversification. It is distributed fragility. No single roof leak can ruin the whole thing. No single bad tenant can erase a year. No one legal notice from one city changes the whole portfolio. That matters. This is the fifth mechanism. I call it the single zip risk. Single zip risk is the danger of pretending that because an asset is real and touchable, it is somehow safer than a distributed claim on many productive businesses. Reality cuts both ways. A house is real, yes. So is a plumbing failure, so is a bad local market, so is a municipal tax hike, so is a neighborhood shift, so is an insurer deciding your region became less attractive. The problem with a single physical asset is not that it lacks value. The problem is that all the idiosyncratic risk is concentrated in one place. A diversified stock fund does not eliminate pain. It eliminates singular dependence. That is a major advantage, especially for people who value optionality. And optionality is the sixth mechanism. This is one of the deepest differences between the two wealth engines. A stock portfolio is liquid. A rental property is not. That sentence sounds obvious, but most people do not think through the implications. If the stock investor wants or needs to reduce exposure, access cash, or redirect the system, he can do so within minutes. That does not mean it is always wise. It means the option exists. The landlord cannot sell one bedroom to pay for an emergency. He cannot unwind 10% of the roof. He cannot exit in minutes without enormous transaction friction. Real estate is lumpy. Stocks are granular. That matters. Optionality is freedom in financial form. It lets you respond to life without having to move a mountain every time you need a hill. Now, I want to be fair, because one of the strongest points in favor of real estate is the tax architecture. The seventh mechanism is what I call the phantom expense advantage. Depreciation is one of the most interesting and misunderstood tax features in real estate because it lets the owner deduct the theoretical decline in the value of the building, even while the actual property may be rising in market value. That creates a kind of legal mismatch between economic reality and taxable reality. The landlord can sometimes shelter part of his cash flow or reduce his current tax bill even while the asset itself appreciates. That is very attractive, and the stock investor does not have a direct equivalent on a taxable portfolio. Stocks do not let you claim annual phantom decline in the same way while the asset is actually rising. This gives real estate a serious tax advantage in the right hands. Add in the possibility of exchanging properties under certain rules and rolling gains forward without immediate realization, and you begin to understand why real estate has such an enduring hold on the American wealth imagination. But again, advantages are not the same as universal superiority. A tax advantage does not erase concentration. A tax advantage does not erase labor. A tax advantage does not erase illiquidity. A tax advantage does not erase the need for repair reserves. A tax advantage does not erase the possibility that your actual cash on cash return looks ordinary once the machine is measured, honestly. This is why I keep returning to the same principle. Do not ask which asset sounds smarter. Ask which engine converts your life into wealth more effectively after including all the hidden costs. Now let us talk about scale, because this is where the stock market engine becomes brutally efficient in a way real estate often cannot match for ordinary people. If the stock investor wants to improve his outcome, he can often do so by increasing his monthly contribution. Move from $300 a month to $500. The compounding curve responds. No second mortgage application, no second property inspection, no second tenant, no second set of legal docs, no second air conditioning unit waiting to fail in August. He simply feeds the machine more fuel, and the machine remains structurally the same. That is the eighth mechanism. I call it frictionless scaling. Frictionless scaling is one of the greatest gifts of market-based wealth building. The stock engine does not ask you to replicate a whole operating business each time you want to add more capital. It simply absorbs new capital and keeps compounding. Real estate, by contrast, often scales in chunks. Another property means another financing decision, another down payment, another risk cluster, another management layer, another possible emergency. You are not just increasing the contribution, you are expanding the enterprise. Some people love that, good for them. But call it what it is. Real estate is scalable through duplication of systems. Stocks are scalable through continuity of one system. That is an enormous difference in lifestyle burden. Now I want to address volatility because stock people often become smug until the screen turns red enough to remind them. They are also human. The ninth mechanism is what I call the silent panic. A broad stock index can fall hard, very hard. It can cut a portfolio down brutally in a short window. There is no tenant to comfort you, no physical building to drive past, no rent check to anchor your emotions, just numbers, falling numbers. And if you are built wrong psychologically, you will do the one thing the stock engine cannot survive. You will interrupt it. That is why I never say the stock market is easy. It is simple. That is different. Simplicity is mechanical, ease is emotional. And emotionally, many people find real estate easier to hold because it gives them an illusion of control. Even when the cash flow is thinner than advertised, even when the repairs are annoying, even when the asset is concentrated, the physicality gives comfort. They can touch it, they can see it, they can tell themselves a story about value. The stock investor gets no such comfort. He must trust process through volatility. He must believe in the machine while the machine is making him look foolish temporarily. That is not trivial. That is a genuine hurdle. So when I say stocks can win in the long run for many people, I am not ignoring psychology. I am saying the engine wins only if the owner does not sabotage it. Now let us talk about work, because this is where I think the comparison becomes much clearer. At year 10, the landlord and the index investor may be in a surprisingly similar range of wealth, especially if the property appreciated decently and the stock contributions remain modest. That surprises people because the landlord story felt so much more powerful all along. But once the full costs of the property are counted honestly, and once the compounding of the stock fund begins to gather speed, the gap is often not nearly as dramatic as the landlord expected, and that is before we price labor. This is the 10th mechanism. I call it the hour tax. The hour tax is the cost of building wealth through something that consumes your personal time, attention, and mental energy. It is a real tax, even if it never appears on your tax return. If one path gets you to a similar net worth but demanded hundreds of hours, a concentrated asset, debt exposure, tenant risk, contractor stress, and emotional clutter, while the other path got you there through automated monthly investing and patience, then those two outcomes are not the same just because the balances are similar. One path required management, the other required restraint. That difference matters more than most people want to admit. The landlord often says, "Yes, but I built real wealth." Fine. But at what hourly rate after everything? And the stock investor often says, "Yes, but I had freedom." Also fine. But did you actually use that freedom wisely or just drift? That is why I say both sides often forget something crucial. The landlord forgets to count the hours. The stock investor forgets to count the power of leverage. And until you count both, you do not have a comparison. You have a preference dressed as analysis. Now, let me be very clear about the conditions where real estate can absolutely beat stocks in a compelling way. If the rent-to-price ratio is strong enough from the start, if the local market is not absurdly priced, if the owner treats the property like a business and not a hobby, if tenant screening is handled intelligently, if reserves for maintenance and capital expenditures are actually built, if leverage is used prudently, and if the tax strategies are understood and applied, well, then real estate can be an extraordinary wealth engine, especially if you use structures like house hacking that reduce your personal housing cost while building equity. That matters because housing cost is one of the largest leaks in most lives. If a real estate strategy reduces that leak while building an asset, the comparison changes meaningfully. But again, this is not real estate always winning. This is real estate winning when operated skillfully in conditions that justify the work. Likewise, stocks can absolutely dominate for the person who values liquidity, wants no landlord duties, has the discipline to automate contributions, can stay invested through brutal downturns, and appreciates the immense beauty of frictionless scale. If that person can increase monthly contributions over time, the stock engine often becomes more and more powerful, precisely because every additional dollar feeds compounding rather than operational complexity. That is why I call the stock engine the quiet escalator. It looks like nothing for years. Then one day you realize it carried you farther than you thought. Meanwhile, real estate is the visible staircase. You feel every step, you can point to every step, you can brag about every step, but you also climbed every step. That is the difference. One is quieter, one is more performative, one is more liquid, one is more levered, one is more scalable, one is more tangible. One taxes your hours, one taxes your nerves. Which engine is better? The answer is still the same. The better engine is the one that fits your actual temperament, skill, available time, and ability to repeat the process without wrecking your life. This is why I dislike absolutist investment tribes so much. The real estate tribe loves saying that tenants pay your mortgage, as though that sentence completes the ledger. The stock tribe loves saying the market averages 10%, as though volatility cannot break the person before compounding saves him. Both tribes are right in fragments and dangerous in totality. I do not invest in fragments. I invest in full systems. And when you look at the full system, the answer becomes much more mature. Real estate is not an automatic path to superior wealth. It is an operating business with leverage and tax advantages that can outperform if run well and bought well. Stocks are not a magical, lazy shortcut. They are a passive ownership engine with immense scalability and diversification that can outperform if held consistently and fed over time. Neither one is simple if you count everything. And that is the final mechanism. I call it the include everything rule. Did you include vacancy? Did you include repairs? Did you include taxes and insurance? Did you include capital expenditures? Did you include your hours? Did you include concentration risk? Did you include the psychological cost of market crashes? Did you include liquidity? Did you include leverage honestly? Did you include taxes honestly? Did you include how easy or hard it is to scale? Did you include what happens when life gets busy, messy, or boring? Because the answer that includes everything is the only answer that matters. So here is where I leave you. If someone tells you real estate always wins, ask him what he paid himself for the hours and what he did with maintenance, vacancy, and capital expenditures. If someone tells you stocks always win, ask him whether he stayed invested through actual crashes and whether he ever increased contributions when it became uncomfortable. If someone tells you one of these assets is obviously superior, Understand that you may be listening to a person defending his identity rather than measuring an engine. I do not care which tribe gets offended. I care which system actually builds wealth for the owner standing in front of me. And for that person, the right answer is almost never found in a slogan. It is found in the full math of dollars, the full math of time, the full math of stress, the full math of repeatability, because wealth is not built by what sounds smartest at Thanksgiving. It is built by the engine you can run correctly for 20 years without lying to yourself about what it costs.